Each disaster turns on one small choice. Learn it, and you'll instantly understand why doomed often starts. 33 most catastrophic expeditions caused by one mistake. Today, 33 dumb small mistakes people keep making on expeditions. One wrong unit lost a Mars probe, the last one is insane. Stay for number 33, because one tiny update can change everything. Mars Climate Orbiter lost to a metric mix-up. A $125 million spacecraft vanished before it could even orbit Mars. In 1999, NASA expected braking burns, but got silence instead. Engineers at JPL and Lockheed Martin were speaking different units. One team sent pound seconds, the other assumed Newton seconds all along. Each tiny mismatch pushed the trajectory lower, step by step. When the probe skimmed the atmosphere, it likely burned up. Back on Earth, the navigation plots looked normal until the last hour. It was the most expensive math homework error in space. And it happened because nobody forced one shared conversion sheet. 2. Titanic kept full speed despite iceberg warnings. The Titanic sank, and over 1,500 people died. In April 1912, Captain Edward Smith still kept near top speed. Ice warnings arrived all day, passed through the Marconi room. Lookout Frederick Fleet finally rang the bell. Iceberg dead ahead. First Officer William Murdoch ordered hard to starboard and engines reversed. The ship scraped along ice, ripping compartments like tin cans. Lifeboats left half full, while the band played to calm. Some still thought it was a drill, until the tilt. The mistake wasn't one bad turn, but a speed mindset. 3. 1996, Everest disaster after turnaround time was ignored. On Everest in 1996, climbers died within sight of camp. Two guided teams, Rob Hall and Scott Fisher, pushed upward late. The turnaround time slipped, and the summit line moved slowly. A traffic jam formed at the Hillary Step, oxygen ticking down. Beck-weathers got stuck, and guides fought blinding weather above. By evening, a storm rolled in and erased the route. Isukanamba and others collapsed near Camp 4, too exhausted. Rob Hall radioed for help, then went quiet on the ridge. It felt like fate, but it started with one delayed decision. 4. Challenger, launched in cold. O-rings failed. 73 seconds after liftoff, Challenger tore apart over Florida. It was January 1986, watched live by millions, including school kids. Commander Dick Scobie and teacher Krista McAuliffe rode that launch. The night was freezing, and rubber O-rings stiffened and cold. Engineers at Morton Thiokol warned managers, but schedules talked louder. Flame leaked at a solid booster joint, like a blowtorch. It hit the external tank, and the stack disintegrated instantly. For a moment, the sky looked normal, then debris spread. The fatal mistake was treating a warning as negotiable. 5. Columbia foam strike dismissed. Re-entry destroyed the shuttle. Columbia broke apart over Texas, and 7 astronauts died. In 2003, Commander Rick Husband guided a routine re-entry home. Days earlier, foam hit the left wing during launch from Florida. Some engineers begged for sharper images, but leadership waved it off. The shuttle kept circling Earth, while damage questions stayed unanswered. During re-entry, hot plasma entered the wing through a breach. Sensors failed one by one, like a warning light parade. Ground controllers heard strange readings, then the radio cut out. It wasn't one loose tile, but one dismissed question. 6. Apollo 13 crisis triggered by a damaged oxygen tank. Apollo 13 limped home after an explosion ripped its guts. In 1970, Jim Lovell, Jack Swigert, and Fred Hazer were cruising. Then a damaged oxygen tank sparked, and the service module shuddered. Lights blinked, pressure dropped and the moon landing vanished instantly. Lovell looked out and saw gas venting, like a ghost trail. They powered down the command ship and lived inside the lunar module. In Houston, Gene Kranz pushed calm checklists, not speeches. A homemade filter fix kept carbon dioxide from poisoning them. One small wiring and handling mistake set that chain off. 7. Franklin Expedition, doomed by lead-soldered food cans. The Franklin Expedition vanished, and 2 Royal Navy ships never returned. In the 1840s, Sir John Franklin pushed into Canada's Arctic maze. HMS Erebus and HMS Terror froze near King William Island. Canned food was supposed to save time, but solder may have poisoned. Men grew weaker, hunting failed, and scurvy rumors followed them. Franklin died, then Captain Francis Crozier tried marching south. They left notes in cairns and dragged boats over ice. Years later, Inuit testimony mapped their path better than officials. A simple supply shortcut turned into a slow, silent trap. 8. Donner Party trapped after taking the Hastings cutoff. The Donner Party got trapped, and survival turned unthinkable. In 1846, wagons headed to California, chasing land and hope. George Donner and James Reed followed Lansford Hastings' promised shortcut. The Hastings cutoff wasn't a road, it was brush and rock. Delays piled up, then early snows sealed the Sierra Nevada passes. Cabins rose at Donner Lake, while food shrank by the day. A desperate forlorn hope group tried walking out, and collapsed. Rescuers arrived in waves, shocked by how many were missing. One route choice rewrote a migration story into a nightmare. 9. Scott's Terra Nova expedition failed after fuel depot errors. Scott's South Pole team reached success, then died returning. In 1912, Robert Falcon Scott learned Amundsen had beaten him. The Terra Nova party still posed at the pole, exhausted. On the way back, depots were misjudged and fuel was short. Lawrence Oates's frostbitten legs slowed everyone, yet he refused help. Edgar Evans fell first, then Edward Wilson weakened in storms. Scott wrote final diary lines inside a tent, days from supplies. A search party found them later, with their rocks and notes. A few miles, one depot call, separated fame from frost. 10. Burke and Will's expedition collapsed after a botched resupply. Burke and Wills crossed Australia, then died near help. In 1860, Robert O'Hara Burke led a rushed Melbourne departure. William John Wills handled mapping, while camels and gear piled high. They reached the Gulf of Carpentaria, but the monsoon turned them. Back at Cooper Creek, a supply party left hours before. Burke returned to an empty camp with DIG carved on a tree. He dug up food, missed the note, and chose the wrong track. Local Yandruwanda people offered help, but trust came too late. One timing slip turned a landmark crossing into a fatal loop. 11. Greely Arctic expedition starved when relief ships turned back. Greely's men waited for relief, and most never made it. In the early 1880s, Adolphus Greely explored Lady Franklin Bay. They built Fort Conger and planned resupply ships each summer. Ice blocked those ships, and messages failed to reach them. Greely retreated south by boat, expecting caches at Cape Sabine. Instead, supplies were thin, and winter pinned them on bare rocks. Hunger and exposure took men fast, while discipline still held. When rescuers finally arrived, only a handful were still alive. A missed relief window turned science plans into a starvation siege. 12. Andre Polar balloon expedition crashed after a premature launch. Andre's balloon dream ended as a silent camp on ice. In 1897, Salomon August Andre launched from Svalbard toward the pole. His hydrogen balloon, Ernen, was supposed to steer with drag ropes. Those ropes snapped or iced up and control vanished quickly. Wind carried them wrong, then the balloon sagged onto pack ice. Andre, Knut Frankel, and Niels Strindberg began hauling sledges. Their diaries mention wet clothes, polar bears, and constant slipping. They reached White Island, then records stopped in early autumn. Decades later, the camp was found, ending the mystery abruptly. 13. Airship Italia wrecked after whiteout navigation mistake. Italia crashed on Arctic ice, and rescue became its own disaster. In 1928, Italian engineer Umberto Nobile flew north in an airship. After reaching the pole, a storm battered the dirigible on return. The gondola slammed down, splitting the crew between ice and sky. Survivors dragged a red tent out, turning it into a beacon. They radioed SOS, while polar pilots hunted through fog and glare. Roald Amundsen joined the search, then disappeared over the sea. A Soviet icebreaker, Krasin, finally reached the camp and loaded survivors. One weather call turned a Triumph flight into a headline spiral. 14. Karluk Arctic expedition collapsed after captain abandoned ship. Karluk drifted helplessly, then crushed, scattering men across ice. In 1913, Vilhjalmur Stefansson led the Canadian Arctic expedition north. He left Karluk early on a hunting trip and never returned. Captain Robert Bartlett stayed as the ship froze into pack ice. Months of drifting ended when the hull cracked like loud thunder. Crew climbed onto ice, carrying supplies, dogs, and a few rifles. Some tried marching to Wrangel Island, and several vanished en route. Bartlett and an Inuit hunter trekked for help across Siberian seas. The expedition's key mistake was losing its leader before crisis hit. 15. Jeannette expedition trapped after pushing into pack ice. Jeannette sank in polar ice, forcing a brutal Siberian escape. In 1879, Lieutenant Commander George W.D. Long sailed USS Jeannette north. They hoped for a shortcut to the pole through the Bering Sea. Instead, the ship froze in, then drifted for years like debris. Pressure ridges groaned, beams bent, and the hull finally gave up. The Long led men pulling boats and sledges toward the Lena Delta. Storms split them into groups, and one boat disappeared completely. De Long's party weakened in marshes, while others reached help inland. The original misstep was betting on an ice route as a highway. 16. Polaris expedition split after a botched ice floe transfer. Polaris fell apart, and part of the crew floated away. In 1871, American explorer Charles Francis Hall aimed for the pole. After arguments on board, Hall became sick and died during the voyage. Leadership shifted to Captain Sidney Buddington, and trust kept collapsing. During chaos at night, an ice floe separated 19 people. George Tyson led that group, camping on ice with little gear. They drifted for months, hunting seals and burning scraps for heat. A sealing ship finally spotted them, like dots on a white plate. One bad split-second maneuver turned a voyage into two separate stories. 17. Aurora drifted away after mooring lines snapped in storm. Aurora was ripped from its moorings, leaving men marooned in Antarctica. In 1915, Shackleton's Ross Sea Party depended on that ship. Captain Joseph Stenhouse fought a gale, but the anchor lines snapped. Aurora drifted into the ice, carrying fuel, food, and tents. Onshore, Ernest Joyce and Aeneas McIntosh still hauled depot loads. Frostbite hit, scurvy followed, and the landscape offered no mercy. They improvised shelters from boxes, while Aurora wandered for months. 2 men later disappeared on sea ice, trying to shortcut a walk. One broken mooring turned support ship into a drifting ghost story. 18. Mawson's Antarctic trek nearly ended when one sledge vanished. Mawson survived alone after his expedition unraveled in Antarctica. In 1912, Australian geologist Douglas Mawson led the Far Eastern Party. Belgrave Ninnis vanished into a crevasse with the best sledge. Most food went with him, leaving Mawson and Xavier Mertz desperate. Mawson kept walking, skin peeling, using a rope to cross cracks. At one point he fell in and hauled himself out inchwise. He reached Cape Denison, only to see the ship already gone. A single lost sledge turned a mapping trip into a one-man epic. 19. Shackleton's Endurance trapped after sailing late into pack ice. Endurance was crushed and Shackleton's crew became castaways on ice. In 1914, Ernest Shackleton sailed into the Weddell Sea, too late. Pack ice locked the ship, then drifted it like a frozen raft. Months passed, then pressure cracked timbers until the hull buckled. The men camped on floes, playing soccer beside their lifeboats. They reached Elephant Island, but it was a rock with no ships. Shackleton and Frank Worsley sailed the James Caird to South Georgia. After crossing mountains, Shackleton returned with rescue, shocking everyone alive. It began with one seasonal gamble, entering pack ice after the window. 20. 1707, silly disaster sparked by a longitude miscalculation. 4 British warships smashed on rocks, killing hundreds overnight. In 1707, Admiral Sir Cloudesley Shovel led a fleet home. They believed they were safely in the English Channel, not west. Longitude was hard then, and dead reckoning drifted silently. At night, the Isles of Scilly appeared as breakers, not lights. The flagship HMS Association hit first, then others followed into chaos. Survivors clung to debris, while cannons and masts sank nearby. The disaster helped push Britain toward better clocks and navigation. One misread position turned a victory voyage into a national shock. 21. Vasa warship sank instantly from a top-heavy design. Vasa sailed minutes, then sank in Stockholm's harbor like a stone. In 1628, King Gustavus Adolphus wanted a floating symbol of power. Shipwrights stacked extra cannons high, making the hull dangerously top-heavy. On launch day, a gust hit, and Vasa leaned hard. Water poured through open gun ports, and crewmen scrambled uphill. Musicians played, crowds cheered, then the cheers turned into shouting. She rolled again, slipped under, and the mast stayed visible. Centuries later, engineers raised the wreck, still packed with carvings. One stability test ignored turned a flagship debut into instant embarrassment. 22. Mary Rose, capsized after a sudden turn with gun ports. Mary Rose rolled and sank, and Henry VIII watched from shore. In 1545, the Tudor warship met the French fleet in the Solent. She turned to fire, with gun ports low and sea choppy. A gust and a heel let water flood the open ports. Men on deck slipped, cannons shifted, and the ship lost balance. Within minutes, she lay on her side, trapping sailors below. Only her mast stayed above, like fingers pointing at the mistake. When raised in 1982, artifacts showed daily life frozen in mud. One sharp turn with open ports turned battle-ready into bottom-bound. 23. Batavia wrecked on a reef after a navigation error. Batavia wrecked, then a mutiny turned survivors into targets. In 1629, the Dutch East India ship hit reefs off Australia. Captain Francisco Pelsart sailed away for help, leaving chaos behind. A merchant, Geronimus Cornelis, seized control on the islands. Some soldiers, led by Wiebe Hayes, fortified another island instead. They fought off attackers with makeshift weapons, waiting for ships. When Pelsart returned, he arrested Cornelis and held grim trials. One navigation error created a shipwreck, and a second mistake created horror. 24. Amelia Earhart vanished after fuel planning went wrong. Amelia Earhart vanished, and the world still debates her last hours. In 1937, Earhart and navigator Fred Noonan aimed to circle Earth. They left Lee, New Guinea, chasing tiny Howland Island across ocean. The Coast Guard cutter Itasca waited, but radio coordination kept failing. Earhart reported being low on fuel, then signals grew weaker. Clouds, glare, and an endless horizon make a small island disappear. Search planes and ships comb the Pacific, finding nothing certain. Later theories point to reefs, radio timing, and simple direction errors.
One missed link in communication can erase even a famous flight.
25. Darien scheme collapsed after choosing a deadly jungle coast. Scotland's Darien colony collapsed, and the national dream evaporated. In the late 160s, William Patterson sold a tropical shortcut. Scottish investors funded New Caledonia on Panama's jungle coast. They arrived underfed, undertrained, and shocked by heat and insects. Malaria and dysentery spread, while supplies rotted in damp storage. Spanish forces pressured them, and English colonies refused open support. Letters home begged for help, but new ships carried more sick. The settlement was abandoned, and losses helped push Scotland toward union. One brutal location choice turned gateway trade into a fever graveyard. 26. Narvaez's Florida expedition collapsed after marching inland unprepared. Narvaez's Florida venture shattered, leaving a few survivors wandering years. In 1528, Spaniard Panfilo de Narvaez landed near Tampa Bay. He split forces, marching inland while ships searched the coast. They clashed with Apalache warriors, and food vanished in swamps. Alvar Núñez Cabeza de Vaca watched men melt from sickness. With no ships found, they built crude rafts and hugged the Gulf. Storms smashed them apart, and survivors washed west along Texas. Only 4 endured, including Estevanico, living with tribes and trading. One reckless split turned exploration into a slow-motion disappearance. 27. LaSalle's Texas colony failed after missing the Mississippi mouth. LaSalle's colony failed, and Francis Texas' dream died early. In 1685, René Robert Cavelier, Sieur de La Salle, sailed west. He aimed for the Mississippi mouth, but ended up on Matagorda Bay. A ship wrecked, supplies sank, and the coast offered little shelter. They built Fort St. Louis, surrounded by Karankawa territory and doubt. La Salle marched for help repeatedly, but distances were brutal. Internal quarrels grew, and mutineers killed La Salle on the trail. Later, Spanish patrols found the ruins, and only a few children remained. Missing one river mouth put an empire plan on the wrong coast. 28. Niger River expedition collapsed after sailing into malaria season. The Niger expedition collapsed fast, despite steamships and big promises. In 1841, Britain sent a government mission up the Niger River. The plan mixed anti-slavery goals with trade hopes and science. 3 steamers churned inland, but the crew entered a fever trap. Malaria hit hard, and men collapsed in hammocks within days. Doctors tried treatments, yet quinine use and dosing were inconsistent. Officers kept logs, watching strength drain as the river kept flowing. The expedition turned back, leaving ships, graves, and broken careers. One timing and planning error was ignoring West Africa's disease reality. 29. Meek cut off wagon train disaster from following the wrong guide. Meek Cutoff promised a shortcut, then dragged wagons into a desert. In 1845, guide Stephen Meek led families off the Oregon Trail. He claimed better terrain, but the route crossed hot sagebrush plains. Waterholes were farther apart, and dusty ruts fooled the eye. People argued at night, counting miles, blaming Meek, and praying. Animals weakened first, then children, as heat and thirst tightened. Some turned back, others pushed on, and graves marked the gamble. When they finally reached the Deschutes River, it felt unreal. One trust decision made the West feel bigger, drier, and crueler. 30. Dyatlov Pass mystery began with an exposed slope camp. 9 hikers died at Dyatlov Pass, and the scene baffled everyone. In 1959, Igor Dyatlov led students into Russia's northern Ural Mountains. They pitched a tent on a windy slope near Kholat-Syakhl. Searchers later found the tent cut open from inside. Footprints led into the trees, and some bodies wore no shoes. Others were found farther away with strange injuries and torn clothing. Rumors blamed spies or monsters, but avalanche and wind explained plenty. Whatever triggered panic, it forced trained hikers into deadly choices. One exposed campsite turned a routine trek into a legend. 31. Hubble telescope blurred by a tiny mirror error. Hubble reached orbit, then embarrassed NASA with blurry stars. In 1990, the telescope launched, expected to rewrite astronomy overnight. First images came back soft, like someone smeared grease on glass. The main mirror was ground slightly wrong, a tiny curve error. Contractors at PerkinElmer had a test tool flaw, and nobody caught it. Astronomers improvised, but the public heard jokes about $1 billion blur. In 1993, astronauts installed corrective optics, basically glasses for Hubble. Then the telescope snapped into focus, revealing galaxies like fireworks. One overlooked measurement turned a Triumph launch into a repair mission. 32. Ariane 5 self-destructed from a software overflow. Ariane 5 exploded shortly after launch, shocking Europe's space program. In 1996, the maiden flight rose from French Guiana, then veered. A reused Ariane 4 software module handled numbers it couldn't fit. The inertial reference computer overflowed, then handed nonsense to guidance. Nozzle command swung hard, and the rocket began to corkscrew. Automatic systems thought it was failing and triggered self-destruction charges. On video, the plume bends, then the body breaks into fire. Years of engineering vanished in seconds because one conversion was skipped. It's a reminder that reused code can hide reused assumptions. 33. Mariner 1 destroyed after a single code typo. Mariner 1 was destroyed mid-flight after it started steering wildly. In 1962, NASA launched it toward Venus from Cape Canaveral. Minutes later, tracking showed the rocket drifting off its intended path. A guidance formula had a tiny notation error, like a missing bar. That small symbol changed how the computer handled noisy radar data. The autopilot overcorrected again and again, chasing ghosts in the signal. Range safety officers watched the wobble grow, then sent the destruct command. A mission to another planet ended in the Atlantic instead. One character in math turned exploration into fireworks on schedule.